coming. Thank you for being here with us today for this last one of our December Quick Bites series for the Growing Readers Together project at the Colorado State Library. My name is Kate Brunner, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am one of the early literacy librarians for Growing Readers Together. My region is the Southwest and Central region of Colorado. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the Growing Readers Together project, we are a grant-funded initiative of the Colorado State Library. We receive funding from the Buell Foundation and also via the Office of Early Childhood as part of the Colorado Shines Brighter Preschool Development Grant. And our goal is to help support libraries in identifying and then serving informal family, friend, and neighbor caregivers in their communities. In Colorado, in particular, a large portion of our young children under the age of 6 are actually in these sort of informal care environments, and that rate seems to be increasing with everything that has unfolded over the past year in particular. There are similar situations in many states where licensed care is hard to come by or not accessible for a variety of reasons. And so working parents or single working parents are choosing informal care. And so our goal is to help libraries be a resource for those caregivers so that those caregivers can provide high quality early learning environments for the children in their care. And so today we are going to talk about doing STEM learning in libraries with toddlers. And so the idea behind these quick bites is just to sort of give you a taste and amuse-bouche, if you will, and sort of jumpstart your thinking around this. And how to, how to think about infusing early STEM learning into your programs, services, and materials. So we're going to talk about toddlers. We're going to talk about why early STEM. We're talking about early STEM in libraries, and then some opportunities for further learning. So I told my mother, I quoted her in my slides, and she was a little concerned and a little proud. But my mother always used to say, whoever called it the terrible twos just hadn't had a 3-year-old yet. And that is kind of how it played out in my house, although I know it's not how it plays out in everyone's house. But I really love this age range, this 19 months to 36 months age range. So I like to call them the terrific twos. And I pulled these particular sentences about toddlers from the Colorado Early Learning and Development Guidelines because I really, really love this quote, especially this last piece here, that they like to explore, test, and figure out what is happening in the world around them. Because to me, that also sounds like a scientist. That's what a scientist likes to do. So toddlers and scientists actually, kind of have a lot in common. When we're thinking about 19 to 36-month-olds and designing programs or services or selecting materials for them, it's good to know, like, where they're at developmentally. This is, just good information to have to inform our choices and our program design. So toddlers, we're talking about young children who are really really getting the hang of this, walking thing. And as they get the hang of the walking thing, they're also getting the hang of the running and jumping and climbing thing as well. And they're really starting to further refine those fine motor skills as well. So these are great opportunities to support that fine motor skill development in particular. And that's as far as their physical development. When it comes to their social emotional development, they're really getting a handle on relationships, starting to understand empathy on a very basic level, and really sort of being aware of their connections to people around them and to the emotions that they're experiencing. They are at the very beginning stages of self-regulation, and they won't master it, for a while, but they're getting there. They're starting to become aware of the feelings they're having and how they can manage them. So cognitively, this is also a really rich developmental time for them. They're really developing their language skills. They're getting interested in print, not just in books, but in the world around them as well, and in playing with numbers. Kids this age love to show off their counting skills. And then also experimenting with cause and effect, sorting and classification, and early problem solving. So, and all of that is really driven by this innate curiosity that toddlers have about the world around them. Their neural development is also absolutely incredibly just off the chart. Their brains make over 1 million connections every second. And like when I sit with that with that piece of knowledge, that is really just incredible to me that that is what's going on in those tiny brains. And so this neural development is really just primed for curiosity and learning and incredible growth. And that's really it's just so they're so well suited to early STEM learning in their development. They're not ready to memorize the periodic table or anything like that, of course, but they are actually ready to start experimenting with the scientific method. And we'll talk more about that in just a sec. So the next thing I really want to talk about is how to link what we know about toddler development to early STEM learning, and then why one complements the other, and how supportive it is of their development for us to actually do early STEM with them. And so I love this little graphic from preschoolsteam.com because it shows how toddlers naturally use the scientific method. And anyone who spent time with toddlers can probably recognize this scenario here about experimenting with the crumb on the floor and whether or not they should eat it, and then testing their hypothesis, and then often bringing you the results of said experiment. So this graphic is really it brings home this message in a really funny way, but it also really shows us that in a profound way too, how we can actually do science with very young children. So doing early STEM also really connects and supports all these other aspects of their development at this age. And the Colorado Early Learning and Development Guidelines break these down into domains. And so these early STEM activities can support these domains really well. And we're talking about physical and health development. And so, taking a nature walk, teaching them about brushing their teeth and why we brush our teeth. These are STEM activities that also support physical health and development. Then also their social and emotional development, if they're working with an adult or with kids, when that is a safe possibility, then on early STEM activities, then they are also getting to develop in that domain as well. And their language and literacy development continues, their cognitive development continues, and then what Colorado Early Learning calls approaches to learning, which is really about executive function skills. And so early STEM learning can actually support learning across all of these domains. It also connects for us as librarians to the Colorado Public Library's early learning framework or early literacy framework, and our goal of public libraries practicing a full spectrum approach to literacy for children from birth, and using all these different early learning techniques to support their growth and development. And there are many, many ways that we can take early STEM learning and connect it to those 5 early literacy practices that we all know really well. We can read nonfiction picture books with young children and look at pictures of the natural world. We can engage in activities that encourage them to use their fine motor skills to develop their writing skills. We can sing nature-based or science-based songs with them. We can talk about their observations of the world around them or the activities that we're doing with them. And we can do all of this in a playful manner. So it's how we do these things, and also even more powerfully, it's how we encourage caregivers to do these things when they leave the library. So we're modeling that for them, and we're making those connections explicit for caregivers between the silly little STEM activity that we're doing, the little baking soda and vinegar science experiment, and all the ways in which doing this sort of stuff in their care environment at home outside the library also continues to support their learning, growth, and development. And so there is starting to be this sort of shift around school readiness and what this looks like. And the Bay Area Discovery Museum and the Colorado State Library have a wonderful toolkit called the Reimagining School Readiness Toolkit. And within that toolkit, there's a position paper that summarizes the literature review and the research that they've done into the power and importance of science learning and math learning in the early years, and how by engaging in those activities and that learning, those hands-on activities with adults and with other children actually really explicitly affect school readiness and their print literacy as well. So early STEM and libraries. Um, how can we do this? What could it possibly look like? How do we bring early science learning, early math learning into our early literacy and early learning programming? So, and why should we do that? And my favorite reason for doing it is because I think it's fun. So, I really enjoy the programs that we do like this. I think they're fun for everyone. And we have some really great examples across Colorado right now. Actually, Arapahoe is doing a Kids in the Kitchen series that looks like I want to go to it. And West Custer has a gingerbread construction kit that they're doing for families. And Pine River Library has this wonderful like Dino Winter series they're doing with take and makes and virtual programming. And so those are just kind of some examples of these common approaches that seem to be successful for weaving early STEM learning into your programming for very young children. And I've kind of grouped them into these four basic categories that we seem to be seeing. And one of them is in-house programming, and obviously, a lot of us aren't doing that right now for very good reason, but we will at some point again in the future. And what we've learned from incorporating early STEM into learning activities for the very young in our libraries are that active programs with activities that can be somewhat self-directed, and then stations based so that children can move from activity to activity, and maybe come back, circle back to another activity and do it again. And those stations also encourage really intentional, meaningful interaction between child and caregiver in the library, are really just these wonderful learning opportunities. And they often are messy activities. So that is something to think about and just plan for. Don't be afraid of it. I encourage people to embrace the mess of early STEM programming, but then also just plan for it. So, for example, if you're going to do like a baking soda and vinegar experiment, then maybe you get some cookie sheets that have a lip to them, and you put your jars on the cookie sheets so that it'll catch any overflow, things like that. Just try to anticipate what you might need there. And then take and make kits have also been incredibly popular in Colorado, and they can be tailored to the very young. And we find that it seems that if they are all inclusive for the most part, if they have all the supplies needed and include clear directions, that's what makes them the most popular with parents and caregivers. A lot of times I have heard libraries keeping, a stash of scissors or glue sticks that they didn't put in their kits, but they have them available so that if someone says, "Hey, we don't have a good pair of kids scissors at home," they're ready to hand those out as well with them. But keeping most of the supplies all inclusive if possible, and then including clear directions. And then also, this is an opportunity for you to speak directly to caregivers in the directions for kits for very young children. And so you can make those connections to early learning. You can help spell it out for caregivers and parents and say, when you do this activity, you are supporting learning like for young children by doing the following, like connecting it to those domains, connecting it to those literacy practices, and then even including a couple of ideas for how to extend that learning, like, or how to do a similar activity with household items, helps encourage them to continue to sort of pull this early STEM learning into how they are caring for these children on a regular basis. And then virtual programming has also become a very, very popular thing. Some of this is done in real time. Some of it is videos that are shot and then distributed through libraries' social media or DVD based. There's even one library in Colorado that got on their local radio station, so that's very exciting. And these can also be combined with take and make kits. So you can send home materials and then have a video that goes with it is another option. So, and getting brave and getting messy is an important part of I think your in-house programming and your virtual programming. So, and then also promoting resources that encourage early STEM learning. So all of your nonfiction picture books, um, any kits or games you have that support early STEM learning. If you have access to things like Tumble Books or Canopy Kids, promoting those. Also, don't forget about digital resources. The ALSC has, like in 2019, the app that won the Early Learning and Digital Media Award was a science-based app for young children. So, there are some really good options out there. Some libraries curate a Pinterest page, with activities that they can direct people to that would have these hands-on early learning, like early STEM activities that could be done with household items that they could also, promote to caregivers and parents. So that there are a lot of options there. And I'd invite anybody who's doing any early STEM learning programming in their library in any form, or promoting particular resources. If you have a favorite resource, or if you have a favorite approach that you've taken, please go ahead and toss it in the chat and just share with us what's working for you and for your community in doing early STEM with young children. And then I was trying to boil it down to like, what would be my top 3 tips if I had to just keep it super short, because our quick bites are pretty short. And these were my top tips. Is the first is to be intentional with the activities that you choose. When you are choosing activities or designing take and make kits, think about what pieces of early learning the activities you choose are supporting, and how you could articulate that to parents and caregivers when you are engaged in the program, or distributing those materials or promoting those materials, so that you can really make those connections for people. Because one of the things we find with working with family, friend, and neighbor caregivers is that they don't realize how much early learning they're actually already doing, that they could just enhance a little bit more if they brought that intentionality to it. So really making those connections for caregivers is a powerful thing that you can do. And it starts with being confident about those connections and choosing your activities intentionally. It's also important to keep it simple with this age group. Lots of bits and pieces, complex activities, multi-step kind of things. Those are better for older children. So like, think about, are the activities you're recommending, or are the activities you're putting together, are the supplies easy to source? Are the directions easy to follow for the caregivers as well as the kids? So try to just keep it simple. Sometimes you can take more elaborate activities that are for older kids and figure out how to simplify them to still be a fun activity for toddlers. So, and then, as I said before, embrace mess. So just anticipate the cleanup, and then by modeling that like willingness to sort of embrace the mess, you kind of encourage caregivers and parents to embrace that as well, and to point out all the learning that's happening. Like, it might look like mess from like an external perspective, but if you reframe it for people and for yourself as a rich learning opportunity for young children, that can be a powerful reframe. So I think one of the ways that you can do that, especially to be that intentional piece, is to learn about early learning for yourself. And so the more you're able to do that, I think that supports your program design and your service design and your material selection. And I also encourage you to be really creative and embrace design thinking as well. I like to say that youth services programming is all beta testing. We're kind of in this constant process of iteration. And so really kind of stepping into that and embracing that. You can even think about it as getting a little meta, like you're experimenting with the experiment to see if it works for your community and for this age group. So, and that's okay. And sharing with each other also. We have a really great network of librarians, I think, in Colorado, but just reaching out and sharing with each other like what's working and what was really fun and exciting, and learning from other librarians and what they're trying and why they're trying it in their libraries is also another powerful way to kind of continue to just deepen how you're weaving STEM learning into your early learning. And so these are 4 of my favorite places to go to kind of connect with and learn a little bit more about early learning. We've got the way that we're approaching early literacy and early learning in libraries. We've kind of put this together with a bunch of different libraries in Colorado. Lots of libraries from all over the state came together and put together this framework. Folks, directors and youth services folks from rural communities and urban communities and mountain towns, and all met and kind of shared, what is it that we want to do in libraries to help Colorado's children be, thriving and valued. And so, so we've put together a framework there with some goals and some objectives that are kind of guiding that early literacy and early learning work for us right now. And then the Colorado Early Learning and Development Guidelines are great for kind of figuring out what skills children are working on from really birth to age 8, actually, I think. But what skills our children are working on in different age ranges, and then thinking about how can we design activities, programs, and services that will support that learning. And then the Reimagining School Readiness Toolkit is a really wonderful resource. You can read about the research that they've done. They also have, a lot of like really great like printable bookmarks and things like that, that you can distribute in materials that kind of encourage thinking more broadly about early learning beyond just those those print literacy skills, and really thinking about what are all the things that go into children being able to enter the classroom and thrive, continue to thrive and learn and grow. So, and then New York Public Library is Raising the Bar online courses, just a really great look at taking early childhood development and infusing it into library services. And these are all free and easily accessible. They're self-paced, or they're just something to read. So, 5 or 10 minutes of your day here and there, and you can, kind of take a look and see what bits and pieces will serve you and your library and your community well. So that's about it. That's what I had to share today. I do want to let folks know to keep an eye out in January, because we will have more information coming from Growing Readers Together in Colorado for how libraries who are already Growing Readers Together libraries can continue to expand their work, or how libraries who would be interested in becoming Growing Readers Together libraries can join in the fun. So we're going to have a lot coming out, hopefully something sort of like a service menu where we can look at how we can help support you all as you continue to develop your early literacy efforts in your libraries, especially targeting those informal caregivers and supporting them in your communities. So I just want to say thank you all for coming and spending this quick bite time with us today. And I can stick around for a bit because we do have maybe just a couple minutes. If anyone has specific questions, you can pop them in the chat if you would like.